Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here at the Raptors side, just here with a different style of video today in this one, and we're going to take a look at one of the more controversial debates amongst Raptors fans, and that's whether or not this team should move forward with a tank and aim for that #1 overall draft pick. Now, I'm hopefully going to put a rest to this debate as I did a lot of research, did a lot of coding, looked at a lot of analytics, and came to the conclusion that tanking is not only one of the worst possible approaches for this Toronto Raptors team, but any team that's relatively good, relatively mediocre, and even one of the upper echelon bad teams. This is a horrible approach for any of those teams, and I'm going to present all of that research, all that data in this video here. If you end up enjoying this video, definitely leave a like in the like section below, as we've been calling it, as it really helps promote these videos to a wider audience, and we're on the road to 20K subscribers, so leave a subscription if you're not subscribed already, and tell your friends about it, because even if all of our subscribers told 1-2 people, that could lead to exponential growth for the channel. So we'd really appreciate all that. And one last plug, there was a lot of research put into this video that I'm about to present, and I've sort of summed it all up in an article, more focused article on our website, raptorsdigest.ca. Over there's almost an article a day being posted on tremendous Raptors content. We've hired on a bunch of writers, so want to start promoting that a little bit more. So definitely go to raptorsdigest.ca. You can create an account so you can leave comments just like you can on YouTube, and really show some love to all the great writers that have been over there. I just wrote my first article today, so definitely check that out. But without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Obviously, following the 2-8 start the Raptors had in their first 10 games of this season, there was a lot of people coming out raining the fade for Cade bandwagon, and a lot of people wanted the Raptors to sort of blow it up, trade Kyle Lowry, trade the integral pieces we've just signed on to our young core in terms of OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, move on from those players and just sort of head straight to the bottom and aim for a superstar in the draft. Now, I get this sort of logic as you look at teams like the Philadelphia 76ers in past years, the Oklahoma City Thunder right now accumulating draft picks even though they haven't really been tanking, but people want that superstar level player, and the Raptors won our only championship when we had that top 5 caliber player, and clearly from the start of the season a lot of people don't see that level of player currently on the Toronto Raptors. However, following that treacherous start, this team slowly crept their way back into the playoff picture, and it all culminated to a point last night against the Boston Celtics where if we ended up winning that game, we would have positioned ourselves as a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, which is a significant jump from being one of the bottom feeders in the entire NBA. But unfortunately, the Raptors lost that game, and the narrative crept back in that the team's not good enough to play against good competition and we should still blow it up. Fade for Cade, get those #1 overall picks, and I did some research and I want to put all of that to rest right now. So in my analysis, I took the records of every NBA team for every NBA season since 1990, which was the first season that the draft lottery as we know it today was really implemented. It has obviously changed over the years, but it stayed relatively the same from that point, and I gave everyone a classification, a sort of label, as one may put it, in terms of how strong that team performed that year. You can see the scoring structure on the screen, so the bottom 5 teams in the NBA were given a classification of 0, the next worst 5 teams were labeled as 1, and those were sort of representing the mid-lottery teams, and then this sequential classification goes up until it covers the entire NBA, with only 2 exceptions, and that's the 2 teams that made the NBA Finals, as obviously that's not necessarily the top teams, and I wanted to make that a classification of its own, as that's sort of the be-all and end-all for most NBA teams. They want to make that Finals, that's their end goal, and obviously if a team's looking to tank, that's the place that they want to end up. So once we had these seasons stored and everything classified, we could figure out the probability it is of a team that is currently in one position to move into the next one, or even stay into their own. So if a team, for example, is a bottom 5 seed, we could figure out the probability of them becoming a mid-lottery team the next season, or staying a bottom seed, or even making the finals from a bottom seed in that next season. We could calculate those probabilities just by looking at the numbers. I don't want to dive too much into the math here, as you can check out the article, you can check out my code if you're really interested in the nitty-gritty math side of things, but basically I use hidden Markov models to generate simulations of a theoretical NBA team that started off in a specific space in the standings. standings. These simulations might be similar to what someone may do in association mode in NBA 2K, but rather than looking at player overalls, we just look at how they performed in their previous season. So with this ability at hand, we could sort of start collecting our results. A lot of NBA fans have different definitions for success in the NBA, and some look at the NBA Finals as the only true test of a winning season for a team, while others may look at being a top seed in either conference as a success even though they don't make the finals, while some fans of brutal teams such as the Sacramento Kings, the New York Knicks, Minnesota Timberwolves might say, hey, being a mid-tier playoff team is a success for me. So I took all three of these in mind and ran 3 different experiments using these simulations. So for the first experiment, I found the probability of a team making the NBA Finals in the years following a certain performance in a season. So we found the probability after year 1 of a bottom 5 team to make the finals, a mid-tier playoff team to make the finals, a lottery team to make the finals, a previous NBA Finals team of making the finals that following year, and then the year after, and progressively for the next 10 years. Although the results from this experiment now on the screen, you can see the graph, and one of the clear takeaways I think everyone can get from this is good teams tend to stay good. And you can see the teams that previously made the finals in a previous year, the year immediately following, there's almost a 40% chance of that team making the finals once again, which makes sense when you think about the number of teams like the Warriors, even the Cavs, the Miami Heat when LeBron was there, the number of teams that went back to back, makes sense that that number's high, and the teams that were top teams were good in the short term in terms of getting up to that level, and there's a clear inverse effect to this, and that the bad teams tend to stay bad. And you'd think if the argument for tanking was correct, that teams that are in the bottom 5 that accumulate these young draft picks, these young superstars, would eventually find their way, creep their way up into the upper echelon, the higher seedings, quicker than the teams that are necessarily in the mid-lottery, the treadmill teams, as so they're labeled by guys like Paul Pierce. But this isn't the case clearly from the graphs. The higher seed you start out as, the more likely it is for you to inch higher going forward in the years following. And it's not really till they all converge 7 years later, because there's too many variables to really predict that far out. But the worst teams tend to stay worse, the better teams tend to stay better as you go forward. So that's in the case of the NBA Finals, and we see similar patterns if you make the sort of goal criteria a top team in the playoffs and a mid-tier team in the playoffs. Again, similar to the NBA Finals graph, same trajectory, same patterns, just higher probabilities for making a top seed rather than making the NBA Finals here in this one. No overlap. It doesn't seem that there's a certain advantage to being a bottom 5 seed as compared to a mid-lottery team, a high-lottery team, a bottom playoffs. As the higher up you are in the standings, the more likely it is that you're going to do better and become a top team in the league. And this also holds true, as mentioned, for just mid-tier playoff success. And the difference between championship teams and top tier teams is a lot lower. They're a lot closer together for this sort of stage, but again, there's an even bigger discrepancy in terms of mid-lottery teams sort of having their way, having a bigger opportunity than these bottom tier lottery teams for the first 6-7 years. And the really interesting thing surrounding this is, regardless of how we define success, there's no scenario where tanking outperforms in terms of winning. Maybe in drafting superstars like has been analyzed in the past, but in terms of winning, it doesn't outperform being a treadmill mid-lottery team. Those teams have a better chance of making the finals in a stretch of time, of being a top playoff team, than these bottom-seeded rosters. So that sort of stifles the idea that even though that tankers have, pro tankers, the fade for caders have, that sure, you're getting those stars, but it doesn't translate into winning. And that, I think, defeats the purpose of having a tanking team, unless you're just trying to sell jerseys and have a player that's just going to leave in a couple years. And I want to stress this point home, that this is supported in the mathematics, that on average, these tanking teams perform worse in the short and long term than the middle of the pack teams, than these teams that are lower to tier playoff teams. They perform worse in terms of the actual goals, not just in win-losses, because that makes sense, but they perform worse in actually getting to the finals, getting to the top seeds in their conference, getting to be a mid-tier playoff team. They perform worse in all of those categories. So That's the numbers, and people bring up other sort of mathematical analytical GMs, and who promoted tanking in the past, and most of the arguments we've seen in the media that go against tanking are mostly strong arm Stephen A. Smith arguments that use a lot of ambiguous language to say it's against the culture of basketball, it's just a disgust, a disgrace, and all these things, but it doesn't even work. It doesn't even work in terms of winning. And yes, Sam Hinkie, he was GM of the Sixers. He made a lot of good sort of decisions in the midst of all that turned them into a solid team. But even still, they only achieved mid-tier playoff success. They're having a solid season this year, but they're probably the gold standard, the best case scenario possible for tanking teams. But you look at teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves, the New York Knicks, the Sacramento Kings, who have been at that bottom tier for year after year after year, and they're just in a constant cycle of losing. And it's not till they really change up their strategy, and we're seeing the Knicks finally do that this season, get some veterans in, change up their management and stuff, get out of that tanking mindset and try to win games and slowly increase their win total. It's not till they get out of that tanking mindset that they actually achieve success. And even in the case of the Philadelphia 76ers, they whiffed on picks such as Jahlil Okafor, Nerlens Noel. I guess that was a trade for Drew Holiday, but I'll count that as a pick. Markelle Fultz, and we're not sure if Ben Simmons is really a top-notch draft pick, even though we'll call that a successful first overall pick for now, but he's not that superstar player that they sort of expected. Even Joel Embiid has had injury history, but yeah, this all leads into the final analysis as to why tanking fails and why it gives these results in terms of poor wins in the long term. So the logic as to why tanking works seems pretty sound, and it's definitely straightforward. It's the idea that the worse you are, the higher draft pick you get, the more likely you are to draft a better player. Superstars win championships, so that's clearly the route you should go. But the first real failing of this logic, the first real error in this judgment is there's nothing guaranteed when you're tanking. Firstly, if you are a bottom seeder team, bottom 3 team in the league, there's no guarantees you're getting one of those top picks to put you in a position to really get these transcendent superstars. So that's the issue there with the lottery system. Secondly, that there's no guarantees that that type of player will even be in a draft. You know, the Luka Doncic's, the LeBron James's, the Jason Tatum's, I'm just thinking of recent draft picks and LeBron because he's the GOAT, but don't want to start a conversation there, but one of the GOATs. But there's no guarantees that level player is going to be in the draft class. So that's unprobabilistic itself, but let's just say those fall through, and that's the case. How many times have we seen GMs just completely mess up their draft picks? And we've seen so many busts, even in recent years. #1 picks like Markelle Fultz, Anthony Bennett, these types of guys, they get picked on a consistent basis, and that's the big thing. Even if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you have a top pick in a draft with a superstar player, there's no guarantees you're gonna get that draft pick right. So a lot of things, you honestly have to get lucky in a lot of situations to even be put in a situation where tanking could pay off and get you that superstar level player. But the second reason it fails is we can consider the case of a team that strikes gold and get that young star player, which is very rare. It's very rare for a team to get one of these guys, but say they do, they likely had to gut their roster in order to get in that position, and they've likely had to be in that situation for year after year in order to stay in that star player, because it's improbable you'll get it after just 1 year of tanking. So they have this player, their roster, they have no veterans, no complementary pieces around the star. They may tend to stay bad to hopefully strike gold once again and pair up another young superstar complement player, but that breeds a losing culture. That breeds a team that is just gets this reputation of not being an upper echelon team. No one wants to go there. You can't recruit free agents even if you're in a bigger market. We saw that with the Lakers for many years until they eventually signed LeBron James, which was just a very lightning in a bottle scenario. But they can't attract free agents. There's no one to complement the star player. Star player becomes disgruntled. He's not developing properly because he doesn't have that experience, those guys around him that can really get him to that next level. And then by the time you have a sort of, you're able to construct a roster that's somewhat decent, then this superstar is already ready to leave. We can see Karl-Anthony Towns in Minnesota looking to do that now. We've seen so many examples of this, particularly over the past few years, of homegrown talent. There's not enough sort of pieces around him. It's a losing situation. Then people don't even blame him if he wants to leave. So that's another reason why tanking just, it's not a good team building strategy, because even if you're getting those stars, it's very rare that that star is going to be a good enough player to turn you into one of those competitive teams and end up attracting other talent. So what should these middle of the pack teams do? Should they just continuously hit their heads off the wall with the same sort of roster and go forward with the team like we've seen the Orlando Magic do for years, the Detroit Pistons do before that? They're tanking now, but what should these teams do? And this is a situation the Raptors could potentially find themselves in currently. And no, I'm not saying that they just have to stick with it, keep their roster together, not get any younger. There are situations where it's good to retool. It's good to accumulate a few draft picks. It's good to get younger players. And we do have an aging Kyle Lowry on our team right now, so that's a direction people are sort of looking at. But the Raptors are a good enough team right now where we can still win. We can still be a strong upper echelon team. Kyle Lowry's been such an asset, I do not want to move him, but he's the case that people bring up. And I'm not against retooling this team or any team that's in the middle of the road. But what poor strategy is giving up players that will make you good. They don't necessarily fit your timeline, but you're not getting tangible assets, strong actual assets back for them. So the Pascal Siakams that we just signed, people wanted to trade him a lot at the beginning of the year. Thankfully he's bounced back, so those talks have died down. But Fred is now coming into a situation where he's struggling a little bit, and people are saying rather than trade Lowry, trade Fred VanVleet. OG Anunoby, who's been out for a long stretch of games, people are saying with the emergence of Norman Powell, we should get rid of him. And these are the players you just don't move. You don't just break up a core and give up these pieces for no reason just because you want to be a little bit worse. You want to get a higher draft pick. And, you know, it's not the case where it's always bad to get a higher draft pick, but totally gutting your roster like we've seen so many tanking teams do, it doesn't work well in the long run, and it's not going to work for teams going forward. So this is something the Toronto Raptors should certainly stay away from. And you know, I hope I've made a strong enough argument to sort of quiet the doubters, quiet the Fade for Cade fan group. And yeah, but let me know what you guys think after hearing all this. Do you agree with the sort of process of the study? Do you think there were some things I missed on it? Do you like these style of videos? I really appreciate you guys listening to the end here. So yeah, you guys are the best for making this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all the cool stuff. Leave a like on the video, we'd really appreciate it. The TikToks, those are always plugging those. But yeah, I'm signing off. Cheers.